And
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Mark, season 9, episode 16. This is the second to last episode this season. And this one's cool because this has been a long time coming. Got Philippe from Caroline Guitar Company hanging out today, talking about his business, about guitar. We're going to get into some nerdy stuff about what he does. Dude, your pedals, I've been watching from afar, and the ones that I have played are totally mind-boggling. And I have a lot of questions, but Philippe, thanks for coming. Caroline Guitar Company into house.
man, it's great to be here, Mark. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude.
You're right. This has been a long time coming. And oh my gosh, I think I might have had hair when you first still asked me, you know?
Well, we'll see if we can grow some back with some spicy conversation, man.
I know, right? If it's that easy, let's keep it going. Let's go.
um, all right. So I always start this off the same way just because I like continuity with my guest to guest to guest to guest. And I really genuinely find this to be a very interesting question. But like, what is your earliest memory having to do with music?
That's a great question. Man, that's a good one. Um, you know, I honestly have to say, I think I found some of my brother's old records when I was like 6 or 7, and he had some Pink Floyd stuff, and I just was like, oh, okay, and learned how to work the record player. It's like at first you play with it, it's fun because you're like, oh, 33, 45, 78, I can make them
Right.
sound like chipmunks, you know?
Yeah.
Hey. Um, but that was kind of wild to remember. And I also I'm of a weird era. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm 51 years old, and I'm old enough to have been a kid right when MTV first started, and um, HBO, the cable, was doing video jukebox as well, and it was just one of these funny things where I'm like, I so vividly remember just falling completely in love with "Who Can It Be Now" by Men at Work, and I
Hell
think
yeah.
and to me, I think that's if I'm remembering correctly, that is the first music purchase I ever made because I remember going into Sound Warehouse. It was a music store in Dallas, and nervously asking the people behind the cassette areas or whatever, do you have Business as Usual by Men at Work? And I remember figuring, like, asking and like, oh, they're naming the band, and then there's the song in quotes, and then there's the name of the album, and then the record label. And I'd seen that Who Can It Be Now video enough times. I was like, oh, it must be Business as Usual is the name of the album. That's the first one. But I think I associate it so much as like seeing it on TV as like the first thing rather than radio. I think it's interesting. I think at Dallas at the time, there wasn't kind of pop radio that was playing like rock music. There was like album oriented rock. There was Q102, which was like, it was playing ZZ Top and Aerosmith and all this stuff. So I think my exposure to this was from pop rock, and buying that Men at Work tape is the first thing I remember buying for music.
That's pretty awesome. And who can it be now? Also, the number one most awesome ringtone that you can have.
Oh, perfect.
You know?
Yes.
It's my buddy
Yeah.
had that one night. We were on a gig, and the drummer I play with had it, and it rang, and I was like, dude, that is so funny. Oh my God.
Can we still get ringtones now? I need to figure out how.
You can make them. So I've done that. I'm a geek for Ted Lasso, and my ringtone is the theme song to Ted Lasso.
Oh, that's a great one too.
And I just made it in Pro Tools, whatever. I dropped it in and sliced it up, and then dumped it back into iTunes and dumped it to my phone. So you can do it. Yeah, it's pretty
Okay.
easy. It's not bad.
Then I need to do it because Who Can It Be Now would be an amazing one,
It's perfect.
It's
So
so good.
let me ask you this because we're not too far off in age. I'm 45. So like
Mhm.
I am also old enough to remember MTV, even though we had cable. It was weird. Like growing up, we had cable at different times. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if like times got tough for my parents and like, well, let's cut something, let's cut cable for a while,
Mhm.
whatever. And then it came back the following year,
Mhm.
But Did you like, because my kind of beginning was grunge. Like,
Mhm.
are you just old enough that you skipped over that stuff, or is the 5-year difference between us enough, or were you like all in on that shit too?
Oh, I was all in on grunge.
Oh,
I was completely all in. But it's funny though because I have fun discussions with my former bandmates who are all right around our age, like 45 to 52. I refer them as former bandmates because we don't gig together anymore and we're across the country, but we were a tight band for a long time, for 10 years. And I fondly remember we're of that age cohort that also did Headbangers Ball and then grunge.
hell yeah.
And it's funny, it's really funny because we talk about this stuff as like these moments that we know heavy metal was dying, and they're
Hmm.
like little hints of what grunge was coming before. Like Soundgarden was on the third hour of Headbangers Ball,
Right.
right?
That would have been
Okay,
like
so
Louder Than Love era too.
Louder in the
Like,
Love area,
yeah.
totally, totally. So Soundgarden was on the third hour. I want to say I'm pretty sure that Man in the Box was a third hour Headbangers Ball kind of thing too.
Mhm.
And there were little hints. You were starting to see bands trying, like Jakey Lee had a band called Badlands. Vivian Campbell had a band called River Dogs. Like you're starting to see some of these like heavy metal guitar players who had played with Ozzy and Dio and people when they left their own thing were trying to do something more naturalistic. Cinderella had an album that was kind of trying to do that a little bit. I liken them all to, they're all like the guy who goes down the Death Star tunnel and doesn't blow up the Death Star, you know? Like they think they kind of have the right idea, but they don't know how to blow it up, or they land it, but
They
it
meant
just
well.
scratches the surface. Yeah, they scratch the surface. Negative, it's not a hit, right? Whereas
Yeah.
Nirvana blew up the Death Star, right?
Right.
But like a lot of this stuff before grunge really blew up, I remember like the Temple of the Dog album came out.
Yeah.
Um, the Temple of the Dog album came out, and I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, that's the guy from Soundgarden. And then I was laughing as I go, there's also this guy who sounds a lot like David Coverdale, and it was Eddie Vedder.
That's funny.
And I just remember thinking, like, oh, I think this is kind of showing the seeds of the future here. And then when it came, it blew up. It was freshman year of college for me. And so all of a sudden, you had everybody who had played, all the people who were playing Guns N' Roses were playing Nirvana. And then I remember bringing Bad Motorfinger and 10 back from fall break. And then that stuff was blowing up. And then next thing you know, just sort of it all just goes wide open. But it's really interesting. Like in the hindsight, there was a lot of stuff that was around that thing that, never mind, just so perfectly uh, just synthesized into like the right bomb that blew up everything. Because like never mind, like I've heard a great story. Josh Scott, who's been a guest for you before, told me this great story. He asked he asked Paul Gilbert. He's like, when did you know? How did you feel the first time you heard Nirvana, right? And Paul Gilbert said something like, I knew by the chorus of Lithium, which is like I think the on third or fourth track on Nevermind. He's like, my career is over.
Oh, wow.
You know, like
Wow.
because you hear it smells like Teen Spirit, and you're like, oh, that's amazing, but maybe that's just like one hit or it's something or it's a flash. And then like smells like Teen Spirit plays, and then In Bloom plays, and you're like, uh-oh.
It's like
Like
hit after hit after hit. You know
you
what
know,
I mean?
you're listening to that album and you're like, uh-oh. Like there's like there's more coming. You
Right.
know,
There's no
there's
going
more,
back.
there's no going back. There's
Yeah.
more coming. You
It's
know,
crazy.
and that
It
album had so many memorable songs. I was listening recently to On a Plane.
Dude, that's my favorite.
So great.
Oh
So
god,
great.
so good. Yeah.
So great. And I think they
Mm.
only played it live like a couple times and it was never, and I'm like, this is the catchiest damn song on 99.9 5% of albums.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
this isn't even a single, you know?
I agree, dude. I agree.
Yeah,
I had so much. Nirvana is like definitely holds a special place in my heart. I'm a huge, I mean, dude, I'm a huge Pearl Jam head.
love it.
So, and like, there's Eddie right there, and then
Yep.
there's a Super Unknown. Where is it? Right
Yep,
there.
Super Unknown right there. Yep.
So like that part of, even though I'm in a jam band now and like I grew into something different, like that stuff is always going to be a part of me. But like
Hmm.
Nirvana, even like if you go back and you listen to like Bleach, it's like obvious that there's something special going on.
Hmm.
And honestly, like, Nirvana wasn't the really first band to be doing stuff like that. When you look at like Mudhoney and all the shit that
Hmm.
was happening up there, but like that timeline of Temple of the Dog in particular, like, dude, that's like Chris barely knew Eddie at that
Yeah.
time when they did that song. So Hunger
Yeah.
Strike was like probably Eddie's real first, like, hello, welcome to the world, like birth.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but like it's so weird to look back, like you were saying with like Headbangers Ball, because I remember staying up late to watch that stuff.
Yep.
And I remember seeing Alice in Chains, like hearing songs off of Facelift and all that.
Hmm.
And then like when I was a kid, I wanted to go see Singles just because of all those bands being in the movie.
Hmm.
The movie, I mean, I was a kid, but I didn't know what that movie was
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
you
They're
know?
talking about the monorail or something like that, and
Yeah, and like it's a love
supersonics.
story.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Xavier McDaniel. Yeah.
it's not for middle schoolers. I was not the
No.
demographic.
No.
But Cameron Crowe was very smart in the way that he did that, because it's like he couldn't get any studio to buy it. And then that one studio was like, well, there's one way that we can make this work. And I'm quoting him saying that,
Yeah.
but like, let's get all these bands from Seattle to come into the scene. And that, I mean, I bought a ticket,
Yeah, it's great, and it's a
crazy.
completely memorable soundtrack. And
Oh,
like,
God.
yeah, I mean, Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns, and it right in
Hmm.
that center position. Yeah, it's fantastic. But they smartly did not just reuse stuff that you would have been exposed to. So like Pearl Jam had two great tunes. They had Breathe and State of Love and Trust that are not
Oh,
on 10 and they're not on verses.
right.
So it's like you have to get that soundtrack if you want that out, those tunes, you know?
Totally.
And yeah, very clever. By the way, I love your Pearl Jam tattoo. I have to ask, have you seen the Portlandia episode where Eddie Vedder guests?
Yeah. You know what's funny about this too is like that was my first tattoo, and I got it when I was 40.
Yeah.
I
Awesome.
always wanted a tattoo, and I could never decide what I wanted to get. And I've gotten another tattoo since then, but
Yeah.
like I knew I wanted to get something musically related. And I'm like, Pearl Jam is the reason I play guitar.
Yeah.
So the Stickman is the most obvious recognizable thing. And then I put a yield sign underneath of it because that's my favorite
Love it.
album of theirs.
Awesome.
So I was like, I'll
Awesome.
make it different than just the Stickman.
How
But
much
yeah,
did it hurt to get a tattoo at 40 though? Now that when you're like self-aware as a human being, you know?
that spot does not hurt really.
Okay.
It's more like annoying, I would say. But like it was in the middle of COVID,
Yeah.
so when I got it, I was wearing a mask and I like started to hyperventilate because I was like breathing into that mask, and then I was like,
Hmm.
I started to get dizzy and I had to take it off. That was the main thing that happened to me that day. And he was like, dude,
Yeah.
your endorphins were probably spiking. And then
Hmm.
you were probably breathing a little bit heavier than you normally would, and then you had that mask on. So I was like, "Screw it! I
Hmm.
don't care if I get COVID. This is worth it." So,
Awesome.
but yeah, so it's Pearl Jam is definitely my North Star, dude.
Yeah.
Period. You know.
Yeah.
Do you have a guitarist or a band like that for you?
Oh man. It's funny. That's a great question deciding the guitarist versus the band, right?
Hmm.
Because I had a great experience recently. Me and some friends a year or so ago went to go see Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs.
Oh hell yeah,
And
dude!
it was awesome. Oh, completely entertaining. And we saw them in a venue that was maybe 300 or 400 people at most.
What?
And he had Steve Ferroni playing drums with him, like
Oh man.
Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Steve Ferroni, who's been gigging nonstop since the mid '70s, and Steve Ferroni might be the best rock drummer I think I've ever seen in person because like that guy has like some drummers have two dynamics, loud and quiet, and
Mm.
then some drummers have four dynamics, and then Steve Ferroni has 0 to 10 with 2 decimal places dynamics. You know,
Right.
like, oh, you need 6.17. Oh, you need 4.82. You need, like, it was just, and all of it where there's never a feeling of like him reducing velocity on how hard he hits the drums
Mhm.
changes feel.
Yeah.
Because sometimes guys like get quiet, but then now they're lagging, you know,
Right. Yeah.
right? And there's no, it's like, oh, he can adjust now, like he can control these things independently. So Mike Campbell was awesome. A friend of mine from high school and junior high is now playing guitar with him. His name's Chris Holt. And Chris
Whoa,
Holt is
dude.
the second guitar. And it was funny because I met Chris Holt before the show and I was catching up. I haven't seen him in, God, 35 years or something at this point. And Chris is like, hey, it's great, blah, blah, blah. It's a fun gig. I don't know how much lead guitar I'll do tonight or whatever, but it's always fun. And I get to play on these songs. Chris had been the guitar player, the touring guitar player for Don Henley before.
Oh,
So he'd
wow.
had this Henley gig and then this, and he tells amazing stories about how different that is,
Mm.
playing, because Henley is one of these guys who will like catch you on any mistake.
I'm
Like
sure.
it's like, I heard on down at the Sunset Grill, you missed this eighth note, second verse. Um, but like, so this is a long roundabout way of saying this, but like after the show, Mike Campbell just sounds amazing. He sings in a really interesting way. He's almost like halfway between John Prine and Tom Petty.
Totally.
Guitar sounds are fantastic.
What was he
Um,
playing through that night? Do you remember?
yeah, he was playing a Firebird that you could tell how many guitar players in the crowd because we're all geeking out. He played mostly a Firebird, and then he played some like 70s thin line telly, kind of like a wide, I think it was like a wide rangey thing, or a like a thin line like with a F hole, I think.
Yeah.
Like it was like a red thing. And I think there was another telly, but mostly he was on the Firebird. And it's a funny story about the Firebird because all of us are geeking out, like, look at this Firebird. What's going on with the Firebird? And apparently he bought the Firebird for $500 from some pawn shop. It's like a 2007. You
Okay.
just like, what I'm saying? It's like not some like precious thing. You like
Yeah.
walk in some pawn shops, like, oh, a Gibson, but
Yeah.
he sounds so great through the Firebird because it sort of ends up in a midpoint sonically of like you're doing, like, I know when he plays like Running Down a Dream by Tom Petty, normally he's on like a Les Paul, and sometimes he's on Ricks, and sometimes he's on Tellys, and sometimes he's even on Strats. And the Firebird sort of ends up sitting in the middle of all of that sonically. It's like punchy enough but still bright enough. And
Mhm.
he sounded great. So long story short, after the show, the next day, the people I'm staying with, great friends, are asking, you know, if he's not the best, who is the best? And I was like, that's an interesting question because as a guitarist, my answer is Jeff Beck. Like Jeff Beck becomes like the lodestar of a guitar player. But
Mhm.
I was laughing because I'm like, I don't know that I'll listen to any Jeff Beck on my drive back from Chattanooga to Columbia. Like it's all going to
Yeah.
be bands. Like they'll probably after the night, I'll be like, hold on, make sure I grab a dozen Petty songs and a couple of these Dirty Knob songs and throw them into my liked pile to join the rotation. But it's always going to be bands.
Mhm.
And I think about guitar playing that I love. Like I was talking about this as a Pearl Jam fan. You appreciate this. I was talking about this with a friend of mine. Like there are moments I freaking love. Of McCready on verses where it's like certain lead breaks, he's just shot out of a cannon.
Yeah.
Like the aggression on something like Go or even Glorified G is just like bam, like he just like he's on top, he's kind of at the front of he's at the front of the beat a lot,
Mhm.
you know, and it's just like like or like you're talking about do you watch The Bear?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Dude, okay, you remember when Cousin Richie takes over end of second season and that
Yep.
Pearl Jam song kicks on and you're like,
Oh, yeah. Pearl Jam's been
man,
on that featured on that show several times.
yeah,
Musically speaking, that oh yeah, whoever the music supervisor is on that show has got to be around our age. It's
yeah,
got to be. There's
yeah.
there's like no doubt he's got to be around our age.
He
'Cause
nails so many great choices, so many. you
Oh my
know?
god, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
when like all of a sudden cousin Richie's like, okay, and all of a sudden like you see
yeah,
cousin Richie almost like look panicked for a second and then collect himself and go, and you're just like,
yeah. That
you
show is
know,
so good, dude, like,
so good.
oh, it's so I couldn't I'll be honest, I could not watch the whole Christmas Seven Fishes episode straight through. I had to fast forward through some of it because my heart was like, "Doo, doo, 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 doo." It's just so
Oh,
stressful, dude. I'm like, "Oh, this is killing me, dude."
oh,
Mm.
it's worth revisiting if you maybe take a gummy,
Right?
or
Oh,
something,
I might have already had one, dude. I was sitting there and I tried to get my wife to watch it and she was like, it's too stressy. It's like from the beginning of that show, it is very
Mhm.
high pressure, like stress. But there's something so like, I don't know, it delivers,
Yeah,
right at the right time. Right when
yeah.
you're like, it's like when I'm on the Peloton and I feel like I can't go any further. The instructor says something that gets me like, okay, I can do it. You know what I mean?
Let's center yourself, go.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yep,
It's like that kind of thing. That show is so great. But
yeah.
about McCready, I was gonna say, they just came in September to Baltimore and I saw them.
Mhm.
And dude, he sounds just as good today as he did back then. And
Awesome.
I will say that there are times when, and I would say this 20 years ago too, but like there are times when it's too like too much of that.
Yeah,
But that night he was playing that in the right spot.
yeah.
And I don't know if it's just he's like matured over the years. He knows when to kind of like blow the wad. He knows
Mhm.
when to like hold back and to be more like lyrical.
Yep,
But I was like, wow, like he
that's
really took
awesome.
me on a journey tonight. And those guys are getting older, man. They're like,
Yep,
some of them are already in their 60s.
yep,
So
yep.
it's
And
crazy.
seeing our old guys, like I wrote about this um in Premier Guitar, and then I mentioned it. Did it again on social media, and um, like I think that's part of what upset me so much about Cornell passing is I think we were really deprived of getting to see somebody who was really well set up to be a badass old wizard.
Yeah.
You know,
He's
like
Gandalf the White. He would have been.
yeah, he would have been just like you just would have held out hope, like I don't know if tonight he's going to hit those notes, and he would have had to conserve himself a little bit and then hit him, you know,
Yeah.
and then it just that's the part that kind of kills me with that. Um, along
That
those
that
lines,
hurt.
yeah, along those lines, so in a happier way, have you ever seen Black Crows?
I've never seen them live. I'm a fan. Never seen them
Oh,
live.
so I was treated to go see the Black Crows in Wilmington, North Carolina, and it was fascinating because let me tell you, okay, as a guitar guy, go, just go, because it's like okay, this is my soapbox. This is where I get. This is where I'll go on a side rant a little bit.
Okay,
That's
hit
really
me.
pissing me off. Okay, I'm hating the silent stage bullshit, like the
Mm.
no amps on stage, uh, digital emulators. I call them fleshlights. Like I think they're just like. I think it's just like I hate it. I can tell when it's happening. I've called it every fucking time I've gone to a show. I've gone to
Mm.
shows where it's happened and like my phone gets blown up from other guitar players at the show. Like, what is this? Um,
We're so persnickety. It's
yeah,
so
dude. But it's like,
funny.
like I saw a show where like a band was double billed with Pixies, and Pixies sounded freaking awesome. Like and you can tell like, oh, Pixies are going to sound great, and they have JCM 800s and super reverbs and AC30s and Ampeg with the fridge and the classic cab, and they are sounding so good. And then the band that they co-headlined with, who I will not say, came out with digital crap,
Mhm.
and it sounded so canned, and it sounded like a preset on a Digitech rack unit from 35 years ago, and
Oh,
it just
no.
sounded like it sounded like Guitar Center, and
Oh.
I just was like, this is terrible. So flip side of that is Rich Rod sounds so good. He sounds so good live. I don't know what he's using for amps. It looks like there's a bunch of different like I want to say there might have been a matchless up there. There's a few different things, but there's like it felt like a bunch of different like 212 cab stuff and head and things. There's some Fender Silverface, Silver Grill stuffing or whatever there. I couldn't quite suss it out where I was. But he's changing it. It is a treat. He's changing guitar almost like every two songs. So
Yeah.
there's Telecasters, there's Zamidases, there's Gibsons, there's 335s, there's a Les Paul at some point. There's like it's just all these things. And he sounds so good. But it hit me as well watching Black Crowes. That could be this is almost a question for you along these lines. What are the sneakiest, toughest good gigs you could have as a guitar player? Because you'd think Black Crowes have gone through a bunch of lead guitar players over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit me watching them play why it's such a tough gig. Because one, Rich Rod eats up so much space. He's an open G and he riffs and he does fills a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't take a lot of lead breaks. The lead breaks are the other guy. They have another person along for the ride for the lead breaks.
Mm-hmm.
But that lead guitar player has to be almost like a Clydesdale or get out of the way for the first 2/3 of the song. They're in standard. They're in standard, so certain chord voicings you can't do because you'll create this. There'll be some tuning shit.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's now you go.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
and
Dude.
then stop.
Yeah,
and then now you need to get the fuck out of the way. But it's a very. I was thinking about this. I was like, this is a tough. And then Rich Rod has unbelievable tone. So you cannot be some guy who shows up. I don't mean this to sound direct, but you cannot be this guy who shows up with a tube screamer and an amp that you bought that day. Like you better have
pro stuff.
You better have pro stuff, and you better have nice stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about this. Like, is there any gig that's like this? Because most lead guitar players, you're involved in the song, you're good, you have like momentum, you're doing stuff, and then you go. But this is almost like being like a horn player who like don't play.
Right. Or like a sprinter. Like an athlete. Like you have to do, yeah. No, that's a great point. You know what gig scares the crap out of me that if I ever got a call to do like a gig, not that I ever will get this call, but Bruce Hornsby's gig is like, that scares the shit out of me because if you get that gig, I feel like I could hang for a bit, but like he is so like his like signals on stage and cues are like eyebrows or like you have to like watch him like a hawk the whole time. And like the music's complicated too. Like it's not like a simple kind of thing. But like that gig is like another thing like that. I feel like you got to play your parts. You got to nail them every night.
Mm-hmm.
And when he does let you blow, you better sing.
Yeah. Like, and if you mess up, he's going to know. He's going to know.
Immediately.
There's no hiding. There's no hiding for you.
0%. No, but that's great. I would love to see Chris because I feel like he was the first person that exposed me to open tunings and slide guitar and playing tastefully because he's not doing anything flashy. He's just very tasteful and he's got amazing touch.
Yeah.
Like he's a great player and he plays appropriately. I'm glad those guys mended ways and are back together.
Yeah.
I would love to see them because I love every single record. I mean, Amorica is one of my favorite.
Great.
So good, dude. Wiser Time.
Wiser Time. Oh, dude. Oh my God. Like, oh my God. Yeah. Wiser Time. I've had the pleasure of covering that in live settings and stuff, and it's a blast. And yeah, they were doing a Shake Your Moneymaker tour where they played Shake Your Moneymaker front to back, and then they played a handful of tunes from the others, right? And man, oh dude, it sounded fantastic. Chris was also, man, like it was just a delight seeing a really good front man not being a moody pain in the butt, but just gliding and enjoying being a front man. because you're
Yeah.
like, oh, this is what such a dynamic frontman can do when he was like singing and there's like long slow parts and he brought like the dynamics down and then brought them back up and was improvising a little bit of stuff and you're just like God, like
Yeah.
I don't know how good Rod's I don't know what it would have been like to have seen Rod Stewart in 1975, but
Oh God, yeah.
this is might be as close as we get, and it
Mm-hmm.
was really good. Like he was so I was like this I hope this is what it is.
Dude,
I hope it's that good, you
I
know.
know. Are you hip to early Robert Palmer stuff like Sneaking Sally Through the Alley, that record?
Yes, I used to cover that I was in like a
Okay.
funk rock frat rock band, kind of
Okay.
almost jammy kind of stuff, and we used to cover that. Yeah. And
Okay.
what's that? It's not Frankie and Johnny. There's another song that he had around that same time. But there's like a double like another Robert Palmer thing. But go on, yeah.
But like it's I think about it in terms like that, like what you just said about like Rod Stewart. Like there's like phases of careers, right? So Rod Stewart ended up doing something different later in his career, but like Robert Palmer is a really good example of like shifting with the 80s times kind of thing. Because
Hmm.
when I tell people about that record about Sneaking Sally Through the Alley, because like the Meters were his backing band, Lowell George played on it, like
Yeah.
it was stacked talent wise.
Yes. Ba-da-ba-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-ba-da-boom.
Oh god, the
Yeah.
first 3 songs, how they go into each other, it's yeah.
Yeah.
But like that record is a seminal record for me. So like what is a seminal record for you that like made you pursue guitar tone? Because we haven't even touched any of my questions yet, Philippe.
I know,
So
right,
like
dude? I'm loving that rapping
yeah,
like
yeah.
this.
But like what's like a seminal record for you to chase tone to like because I think it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of you guys who build pedals and I am like so unqualified to like even think about putting a circuit together. But like what I find fascinating about what you guys do is hearing a tone in your head, chasing it with electronics and figuring it out and
Hmm.
making it work. So like was there a record that was like, "Oh god, if only I could sound like this."
Yeah, and but you might laugh at what I say. So I'll give the expected answer, which is of course still Pink Floyd's The Wall. Like I still mentally chase the sounds, the stuff that happens on things like Run Like Hell to this
Yeah.
day, right? But the album that first got me into thinking about tone a lot is Live After Death by Iron Maiden,
Oh, okay. All right. That's not
right?
laughable.
Which is post it's the Power Slave tour. And one thing I'm eternally grateful for, whoever it made, and oh my gosh, if I could give them whoever produced it did this. They hard panned Smith and Murray left and right. So you could figure out their parts by just balance and running. And now all you're hearing is Smith, now all you're hearing is Murray. Right. So that was great for figuring out parts, but also you start to go like, wait, they sound different. Why? And in the booklet for Live After Death, they list all the gear,
Really?
including the pedal boards, like what was on
Oh.
the pedal boards. So Murray is running 50-watt Marshalls, um, and like 4 cabinets of them, and he's running um, like MXR distortion pluses and stuff into the
That makes
cabs and
sense.
things like this, all the stuff. Smith, I want to say, was running like Boss overdrives and like I want to say slightly different Marshalls and Boss Super Overdrives, Tube Screamers, different things like that, and running a mix of 412 and 212 cabinets,
Oh.
you know? And so you're like, could this be why he sounds different? Could this be why? Could this, like they mentioned Smith is using Seymour Duncan pickups, Murray is using DiMarzio's.
Wow.
You know, where you're like, wait, why does Murray is frequently more in the neck pickup. Smith, you can tell, is more in the bridge when they're taking a lot of breaks. Um, and it sort of was like, okay, why does this sound like this? Appetite for Destruction does a similar thing. There's a lot of hard panning, and you're like, oh, this is what Slash is doing, and this is what Izzy is doing, you know? So how are these fitting together? And you start to realize they sound so big, not necessarily because they're doubled or on top of each other, but they're like the timing is just like a hair off, you know,
Oh,
where
okay.
completely on with each other, but they're this, you know? It's almost like Adler has an idea of what the center of the beat is. Izzy has an idea, and Slash has an idea, and they don't all land at the same time, but they land overlapping.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, those become like really important on the Tone albums. But if there's one tone that I hunt for, and I may have said this in other podcasts and things, but there's an album by an artist named Chris Whitley called Din of Ecstasy.
Yeah, I'm hip.
Yeah, and I loved I got to see Chris Whitley when I was in Dallas in 1991 when he was touring after Living with the Law, and I got to see him again at a small club after he was doing that album with the rocket ship on the cover.
Yeah,
But
that's the one I love.
Rocket House.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I got to meet him before he passed. He was playing the venue where my wife and I had our wedding reception.
Nice.
Yeah, it's Jam in Java, Northern Virginia. And
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah. So
I've been there many times.
yeah. So that was where my wife and I had our wedding reception, and I got to meet Chris Whitley. But that Din of Ecstasy album, the sounds are so great. They're so great. And like they seem impossible. Like they're dirty, but they're clean. It sounds like a neck pickup and a bridge pickup at the same time.
Mhm.
Sometimes it sounds like he's doubling, sometimes you're not. Sometimes it sounds like he's doubling one guitar in an open tuning with stuff in standard. Um, Josh Freese is the drummer,
Oh yeah.
and it's like it's just beating the shit out of things. But the guitar tones on Narcotic Prayer, it's almost like a magic trick that I don't want to know because maybe it'll become less magical to me. Like if
Right.
the recording engineer just goes like, "Oh, all we used was a Gibson Melody Maker and a 100-foot cable to make it darker or whatever." Like
Mhm.
I almost don't want to know, but I'm so to this day blown away by like I can put that on and I'm just like, how? And I just
Yeah.
love it. And a part of me always wants to chase. I've had moments. One other side story along these lines. So I had a moment. Sometimes I'll go see bands, and I'm just like, God damn, I love how this sounds, and I gotta know. I just gotta know, right? Like, and that's what keeps me going. Being like, how the hell is this person doing this? How is this happening, right? I remember I went to go see. Uh, there's an artist named Nathan Hussey. He plays in a band called All Get Out, and uh, one of his former bandmates had been an employee of mine, and it's great kind of emo rock, um, very catchy stuff. Um, but he was doing a solo show, and his guitar player for that show sounded just enormous, right? I mean, he just sounded so great. Dave Ellis, I was like, he sounds so good. I've got to see what's on the board. I've got to see what's happening here, right? And I could tell he's using like some Telecaster with wide ranges, like a deluxe or something, and he's got an Ampeg Gemini with a big 15 for the speaker in the cab, and there's a board, and I don't know what's on the board, but I got to find out what's on that board because I'm like, I got to find out, I got to learn, I want to know what's going on in my brain. It's like, what could it be? Could it just be some Boss stuff that's stacked interestingly, or could it be a an old some old overdrive from the 70s that I don't know about, or could it be like he's running a muff stacked with something else, or what's happening here, right? So after the show, he sees me staring at the board. He goes, Philippe, what's up, man? And I was like, hey, man. And I was just like, I just got, and he goes, man, your haymaker was on the whole show tonight, man. It was great. And I was so disappointed. you know? Because I was like, of course, I think it sounds good.
Right.
Like I like smoking my own supply.
Right.
I like smoking my own supply. Of course, I think my own pedals sound so great. And I was
That's
like,
that's a good testament though, because like you would have, even if he would have said it's a fuzz face and I just have my volume rolled back all night, you'd be like, oh, okay, that's cool.
yeah.
Like I loved how it sounded. Like it doesn't matter, but that's a great testament to like you creating something that sounded that good.
I was well. I think I have to give credit to the artist, the musician, stacking the thing, putting it well, playing good stuff that feeds it, and putting it as part of the ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
But but a part of me is still to this day like, There's like it's like that Aziz Ansari bit about Kanye West getting down to his own beats.
Oh yeah,
Like,
I remember that bit.
these
Yeah,
beats are so dope, you know.
yeah,
And I'm like,
okay.
I like Kanye now, you know. Like, I love the sound of my own pedals,
Oh
you know.
God.
Like
Are,
I was like, you know.
do you get in your head with that stuff too? Like when you play and you're like you think it sounds good, but you like if you recorded it, you wouldn't want to listen back to it because you're like, I don't want to hear myself. Like,
Oh, dude. So I'm always frightened. Like, so aside to this, that's a great damn question, man. Because I was thinking about this recently. Like, I was having so much fun tracking bass recently,
mhm.
and I was like, why do I have so much fun? And I'm like, oh, like when I'm tracking guitar, I'm like so on job. Like it's like, does this reflect on me as a guitar player? Does this reflect on me as a pedal designer? Does this reflect on my tastes in putting these things together? Does this reflect on my tastes in the instrument? Does this reflect my thoughts on pickups? Does this reflect my tastes in how I mic the amp?
That's a
Right?
lot to
Like
think
it's a
about.
lot. It's a lot of baggage, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like all these things. Like, what if I play badly and people think the pedal sounds like crap? What if I dial the pedal wrong and then people think I'm crap? What if like all these things, right? And meanwhile, it's like when I track bass, I'm like, oh, boom, 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 makes a bassy sound. Let's go.
There's
You know?
something simple about it, man. It's
Yeah.
it's fun. I love playing bass too. I love it. Dude, when I was going to school at Berkeley,
Mhm.
after I had finished, I work for that's my day job. I work for Berkeley,
Yeah.
but I was in a wedding band like when I was a student, and the head of like the scholarships team was the drummer, and so I worked in that office when I was a student. So we started rehearsing because they wanted me to play guitar and stuff. And then one night the bass player couldn't show up, and there was already another guitar player. I'm like, well, maybe we should, reschedule. I'm like, I can fill in on bass tonight. I have a bass.
Yeah.
And then I played bass that night, and they were like, man, well, if he ever can't show up, you can sub, right? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then the next time we rehearsed, the guy was like, I heard you're trying to take my gig. And I said probably the most like offensive thing to him. I was like, well, there's two less strings. he was and he was like, come on, man. And I was like, I'm just kidding, dude. I'm nowhere near as good a player as you are. I can just stay in a pocket. That
Yeah.
was all I needed to do.
Yeah.
But I love it too, man. There's something freeing about playing with the foundation of the music with the drums.
Mm-hmm.
That just feels
Mm-hmm.
nice, you know?
Yeah. And there's something freeing about like I found my sometimes like I track bass first, and my plan was originally like, okay, let me just follow the chords and do this thing, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, let me hear. Wait, I hear a bass line. Let me play that bass line, and then I'm like, I need to rewrite what I had originally set out to do to make room for this because this is like all of a sudden it's like an outsider thing, like, and I'm reminded like, oh, like a lot of playing, writing, recording sometimes is just like, well, what would I want to hear? Well, why don't we just do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
it seems it may be an oversimplification, but sometimes you're like, well, I'd like to hear the bass do this. Oh, well then, okay, well, how do we make room for that, and how do we get out of each other's way? I mean, to this day, I still sometimes think of like I was laughing. I was like, I did some mild guitar repairs today and stuff, and meant to post about that, but you sometimes just don't feel like making
Yeah.
content. You
Yeah.
know, do people really need to hear about me cleaning out pots
All
today?
right.
You know, and I was so like, it hit me as I'm playing, and I start playing songs from like bands that I've been in, and I'm like, son of a bitch. I know it's 15 years too late, but I really shouldn't have played that suspended chord there. You know, like you're here, like all of a sudden you're here, like, wait, the melody is this.
Right.
I was just fucking why did I do that?
That's part of
Why
growing
why did
up,
I do that?
man.
Why I could have easily just dropped the root, played an inversion. Doesn't
Mhm.
sound fucking great. But I had to be so fucking clever, decided to spend a ninth or some shit. And I
Yeah,
don't
but
know.
think about the music that we grew up on too. It's like I think that it's tough because I think at the times when we want to embellish something and we want to get a little bit more hip with it or smart or cute with
Mhm.
it, um, I think we grew up on the most simple, like just power chords. Nobody
Mhm.
was playing inversions. Nobody was playing part of the chord.
Yep.
Everybody's playing full bar chords, moving around. Now, not Pearl Jam, I'll say that.
Yeah, yeah.
But
They riffed.
yeah, but like, it's kind of hard to kind of pull yourself apart from like what you have ingrained in you.
Yep.
So like when you get to a place where you're like, okay, I'm gonna like embellish this chord, I'm gonna play attention, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. At the time, that was the right decision
Yeah,
for
that's
you,
true. Fair
you
enough.
know?
Fair
So
enough. I did have a fun chat. A longtime friend of mine does play. Bring it back around to the Petty thing. He plays in the Tom Petty tribute band, and I was laughing. I was like, "Do you ever have moments where you like all of a sudden realize like that C add nine that you is just an instinctive thing to play? All of a sudden you just be like, that would sound like shit here, you know?" And he goes, "Dude." He goes, "I once threw in like just something like a minor seventh on something instead of a minor. I swear it was like drummer, bass player, everyone like,
get out of here with your
like
jazz
what?
shit.
What are you doing? What's with that? You know, you know,
Fancy
and
chords.
but it's like you were like, all of this is part of the work. All of this is part of the flavor of the work, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and you're like, people people are expecting the hamburger a certain way, and they do not want your ghost pepper jack bullshit. you know,
Nope.
like they do not want your arugula. They do
No.
not want your they do not want your sriracha aioli in the thing.
They don't
They're
even want American peel from the plastic cheese.
Yeah,
Just give me the burger like
yeah,
itself, no
yeah,
bun. No
yeah.
bun. Oh god.
So yeah, but yeah, it's. I think these are all kind of beautiful lessons about like getting to do this and be
Mhm.
part of this expressive thing. And I think there's something beautiful about when I get past the insecurities. I do think there's something beautiful about being a guitar player, and the fact that like a singer is really kind of bound by the physics of their genetics in a lot of ways. So you can train the singer, you can do a lot of things, but guess what, like Aretha has something in her vocal cords that you just, if you're not born with, you can't get, right? That's just something you cannot get. But a guitar player does have a lot of latitude to craft their tone, not only from their practice technique, not only from their hands, from how they hit, but also in terms of what gear they use to project the thing, how they dial it up, how they set it. Um, I for shits and giggles, I swap pickups and guitars a lot, and all of a sudden I put a set in, and it was like this is going to sound like an exaggeration, but I'm like, oh, is this how these guys sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan or John Mayer? Oh,
Uh, Yeah.
oh, okay. Like it all of a sudden seems a lot easier now, with like these
Mhm.
bright single coils. Like, oh, that certainly is a big part of it. Or like you plug in a Les Paul into a JCM 800, and you're like, I wonder how Slash sounds like this. You're like, oh, well, you just cook with the bacon,
Yeah.
you know.
Do you
You put
Philippe, do you lean more on darker tones or brighter tones? Like where do you sit usually? Like what do you like if you get on stage and you're like sound checking, you're getting your amp dialed in? Do you like darker tones or brighter tones?
That's a great question. I lean darker tones, but then there have been times I'll never forget when like all of a sudden you break strings or something, and the only thing left on stage is a Telecaster, and all of a sudden you grab the thing, and all of a sudden it seems like so alive, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I maybe I need to rethink things a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you're like, oh, like you hit a chord on a Telecaster, it's just like bang, and you're just like, oh, okay. And you're like, okay, okay, at least let's turn the tone knob down a little bit before the lead break or whatever, because I'm going to saw people's heads off,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
But there's like, yeah, I mean, there are things I'm leaning towards, but I'd love to be shown or discover when I'm wrong. And
Mm.
I go, oh, there was something to that. Like a high watt has been kind of a wake up call for me on that because,
Oh, how so?
well, I dial up certain things like we got this high watt custom 20 and it's just been like it's been a delight, right? This amp. Custom 20 head, it's loud, but it's not super loud. It's 20 watts. It's great. It's like, and the high watt, if you dial it up the way you think you dial up like a Marshall or a Fender, if you're like, okay, well, let me do what I do, it's all of a sudden like a weirdly dissatisfying thing. You're like, oh, okay, huh. And then you're like, hold on, I'm just gonna close my eyes and not pay attention to what these knobs say, and just start futzing with things, and you end up with them all askew in a way that you think makes no sense, and the amp sounds absolutely fantastic. Like it's just like, and I would have never dialed this up, but this is just like, oh, and this is bright but not harsh, and it's clear but not this, and dirty but not these, and it's just like, and the EQ on it is so powerful that if you dime the volume and dime the gain, but you kill all the EQ, like you turn them all to zero, they're all so powerful that it's like literally the amp is sounding like this. You're like playing as hard as you can. And you're
Wow.
like, oh, these EQs are really important in this amp. Whereas like it's like in a Fender or a Marshall, you get used to that PTB circuit that's common in those amps, and you're like, oh, it's a little too bright. Okay, let's just turn the treble down. And oh, a little missing in the mix. Okay, let me turn the mids up. And oh, the bass is it's too much bass now. Okay, now too, like it's just like this.
Hmm.
Whereas with the high watt, you almost have to remember like, oh, like gain is just how much it's feeding to the rest of the amp. It's not like gain like distortion. It's just
Right.
like how much of your guitar is feeding the amp. And you're like, oh well, actually the clean sound that I like on this amp is with the gain around 2 o'clock. You
Yeah.
know? And that's like, oh, now I feel like I'm really getting some content. Oh, this EQ. Oh, you might want to cut the bass a little bit, but not too much, so just so you don't end up with these things kind of fighting. And
Hmm.
I think that's the kind of that's a real delight to be on, like discovering that, like, oh, like, can I be present with this thing and let it teach me something, you know?
Yeah, totally. Dude, that's how I feel about this Two Rock. I don't feel like I really got to know this amp until I had it for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I gigged it a ton and I felt like I loved it, but I'm like, I only recently understood how it needs to be run and what
Mm-hmm.
it likes. What it
Yep.
likes is the main thing. Because there are, I mean, I feel like it's like an organic thing. It's like a thing that you have to have this symbiotic relationship with because I have very dark hands. I feel like when I
Mhm.
play, no matter what I play, it comes through kind of dark.
Yeah.
And so if I want to get it bright, I have to juice it a little bit, but I don't like bright tones, so I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But like that is the most fun. I think I had a conversation today with somebody commenting on a YouTube page or YouTube video about like it's funny how people have all these different ideas of what clean tone is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, because it's very subjective. Because to me, I need a big, fat, wide, clean, and that clean might have a little juice to it. It might have a little
Mm-hmm.
hair, but to
Yeah.
me, that's clean. It's not rolling JC 120 clean. I don't like that. But like, yeah, I think everybody's interpretation of what is a clean tone is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
So, I
I,
mean,
I, I today I brought by a pedal, um, foundational roots of something that we may work on down the road. But I was like, what do you
ooh,
think of this kind of thing? Um, and it was wild watching a friend of mine, John Wharf, who's plays in a lot of like these church bands where it's like these fast chord change kind of things, like
yeah.
and he plays delightfully funky in that like that Paul Jackson kind of like thriller way, like like these little like pentatonic little double stop stab things.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because I'm like, his clean is so it's so narrow. It's
Mm.
so different than what you and I are describing as what we like as clean, but it's almost like he's operating this thing almost like a hi-hat or a percussive thing.
Ah,
And I
well,
was
that makes
like,
sense, I guess, for that
yeah,
shout. shout chorus type music, like
Yes.
that. Yeah, that makes sense because you
Like
got
it's
to
like
fit a frequency.
yeah, and his job is to get in this place and act as, like he has this he has this drum with strings basically, you know, and it's delightful on those fronts. And yeah, but you're right. Like I think people's hands do sound a certain way. Um, I've sometimes wondered about this. It's like you and I could rap about this for hours, but like I
So
sometimes wonder if really highly technical players end up sometimes thinning out the sound of their hands because they want to be able to get a lot of precise stuff in.
yeah,
Because I've sometimes noticed this among certain players where I'm like, oh, this sort of just sounds like thin almost, and it's like I've even seen them play through other people's rigs where they sound, I'm like, I know that sounds enormous, and then
hmm
it's like it sounds thin. I'm like, I just wonder if they've trained themselves to be tight in that way that someone like Jay Mascis, who couldn't give less of a damn about, ends up just sounding like he has, these enormous like chomper notes
yeah.
pop out, um because it's never been an objective of his to like pull off something, you know
And his genre of guitar is prehistoric, I would call it. You
yeah.
know, it's like caveman, like
Yeah.
boom, like
Yeah,
so it's way different. But yeah, I
yeah,
know exactly what you mean. It's funny. If I put this amp on a stage and I get like 5 of my friends who are all great players
yeah,
play through my rig, my guitar, it's gonna sound like them. And I think that's a lot of people kind of like think that's so cliche, and people say that all the time. Like, what do
yeah,
you sound like playing through this person's rig? Hopefully you sound like you. That would be
yeah.
my guess.
Hmm.
But like, I can think about. In fact, that would be a great video if I could get some people to like do that because I think it's an interesting concept and it's an interesting experiment to like. It's like the Tonewood argument of like like fretboard, rosewood versus maple kind of thing. Like, does this really exist? Do you really
Yeah,
sound that each person sounds different?
yeah.
I think they do, and I think it has a lot to do with the way that your flush hits the string, which sends
Hmm.
the note through the current of your cord through your amp
Yep,
out the speaker. So it's
absolutely.
it's pretty fascinating. But dude,
I would love to see you do that with one take of it where it's like, let's imagine like a phrase that you'd like to see everybody kind of play. Like,
yeah,
imagine everybody is expected to play something like you give something everybody in that group could pull off. Like, play some of the phrases
Sissy
by
Strut,
BB Sissy Strut or
yeah.
BB King's Thrill Is Gone lead break parts, whatever. And one time you say you're not to change the amp settings. Like these are Mark's amp settings, and you plug in. How different do you sound? But the other thing I think comes in is what does that player react to in the amp, and what do they change?
Yes, yes.
Like, what do they go? Oh, hold on. To bias for me, I go this because I was always a Strat player growing up, and
Hmm.
I never understood why these Les Paul guys were cutting so much bass out of their Marshalls. And then all
Hmm.
of a sudden, then you get a good Les Paul and you plug in, you're like, oh, I know why.
Yeah.
You're dealing with 24 and 3/4 scale. You're dealing with PAFs. You're dealing with a mahogany body with a maple cap that's weighing, you know,
9 pounds, 10
nine
pounds.
pounds minimum, 9, 10, 11, 12, at
Mm,
12 on up for
mhm.
Norland era. And like, oh, you've got to make some adjustments here, you know? Um, you're dealing with fixed bridge direct into the body. I mean, a strat is a wildly different thing if you float it versus put it to the body. It's like like I need to do that A/B test of like, hold on, I'm going to play the same stuff
Mhm.
flat to the body decked, and I'm going to float it. We're going to adjust, get it back in tune, blah 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 blah, change no amp settings, and hear how different that
That
sounds.
would be super interesting. I'd watch that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think there's a real difference, and like even things like the springs become more active versus
Yeah.
floating. You
Mhm.
know, it's just like I'd be curious what happens if you did the experiment with the two rock where it's like, okay, one time no settings. Let's just hear how different people's hands just raw as hell. But then how did people compensate or emphasize? They might have been like, hold on for a second, this is dulling what I want to do.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I want to push things, you know?
Yeah, it's all fascinating to me. For other people, they're probably like, "This is the most boring shit I've ever seen in my life."
Oh, I know, right?
But
Yeah.
I'm like, it's so interesting, and it makes it. I like the whole fingerprint thing of like, everybody sounding like themselves or hopefully trying to sound like themselves. And I've been in forums with slide guitar forums where everybody wants to sound like Derek, and like I get it.
Yeah, he sounds really good.
He sounds great. But I think Derek would probably be like, "Don't do that, man. Like, just not that I don't want you to cop my thing. It's very flattering, but like, try to create your own thing,
Mhm.
like Ariel Posen has done. He's
Yeah.
definitely carved a very specific fingerprint with that, which I think is very cool.
I love how he sounds. I love the what he's dialing up sound wise, where it seems sometimes like he's like so detuned on the low strings and like so like he's like fuzzy and gnarly in a weird way that
Mhm.
like sometimes I'm like, does he have an octaver on or something? Like there's just something that's
Sometimes.
really interesting in the tones. It's a little different than what I'm used to hearing from slide players.
Mhm.
Uh, the guy who wrecked me on that front was did you ever listen to Sonny Landreth on slide?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
That's like
I,
mastery. It's like an orchestra.
I felt like such a jerk once. I was at like a slide clinic and these guys were explaining like, oh, it's sort of tough when you're in standard tuning to get voicings, you know. I was
Mhm.
like, why don't you fret behind the slide? And they looked at me like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, you can fret behind the slide. And like, and everyone at the clinic's looking at me like, oh, there he goes again, or something like,
That's a tough,
there goes the weirdo pedal guy,
right? That's
making
a
a
tough
making a scene.
technique to
But I was
do.
like, and I was like explaining the physics. I'm like, here's your fret, and here's the string, right? Right. But when you do a slide, you're like this, but then you could fret behind it, and it's here. Like I was
Yeah.
like, hold on, let me just show you. And it's like you play it, and then you put this fret down, and it dips under the slide and goes to the fret. And I remember Sonny just like I felt like I thought Sonny Landreth like settled this. Like, I'm sorry, but I just remember seeing videos and Sonny Landreth talk about this where he's like, "Oh, you fret behind the slide and you can do this stuff."
Mhm.
And it's like, and he would get these crazy chord voicings or these phrases where he like slides and then does stuff behind the slide or whatever and goes. And I'm like, oh, because sometimes I would be like, how the fuck is he doing this with the slide? Like these like
Right.
runs. And then
Yeah.
when I realized it's like, oh, the slide is hitting one note of the run, and then there's like slide, fretted, fretted, slide, fretted, fretted, slide, fretted, fretted. Like, oh, this is how he's doing this,
Yeah.
But yeah,
What tunings does he play in?
I I can't recollect. I felt like there was some open G.
That makes sense.
Um, but I can't it was so long ago that like I had friends share his records with me, and I just was like, what is happening with this? Like,
Yeah, that dude ain't
guitar
right.
playing?
He
Yeah.
ain't right. Well, Philippe, we haven't even talked about your freaking company, dude. So, let me just ask you the couple questions really quick.
Yeah, we'll
I don't want
lightning
to.
round it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I find like the first time I really played your stuff was like the little sample board that you guys sent me that I could check out
Yeah.
before the show. By the way, thank you so much for doing that. That was
You're
such
welcome.
a nice thing, and it's been so fun to have them here. And I'm gonna make a video before I send them back to you guys, just
Have
kind of
fun.
showing off some of these. But like my main question, or there's two main things that hit me. Okay.
Mhm.
So first and foremost, the Arigato, that phaser is the soupiest, coolest phaser I think I've ever heard in my life.
Thank you.
And the reason for that is I think I'm texturally aroused. So like
Okay.
when I hear like throbby, like deep, like phasing like that, or if I hear like a univibe with a nice throb, that makes me play differently.
Mhm.
It makes me like it's like it's so palpable to me. It's like I'm kind of like part of whatever like that is, whatever's going on in that pedal in my hands. It feels like I'm in it.
Mhm.
How do you create something with that much of that depth? Like what is it? You don't have to share secrets of like
Oh,
chips or anything like that, but
I don't mind sharing. I don't mind sharing
because
what
I've never heard anything with that much of a sweep, that like rich. of a
Thank you.
tone. Yeah.
Thank you. So here's me coming clean just with like my limitations and the what hit me with it. Let me ask you a first question. When you played the Arigato, did you get to play it through that amp you have behind you in that cab?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Because so there's two things that are happening. One is that it's a phase sweeper, which is sweeping through, it's a phase shifter, it's sweeping through a whole bunch of frequencies. But the second thing is that phaser is one of those underappreciated things, and I would put vibes as well with this because it's become underappreciated in our modern world where people are consuming content from this. And these speakers blow,
Hmm.
right? And they're consuming content through this, or they're consuming content on their laptop. If you're lucky, they might consume content through a laptop and studio monitors, right?
Hmm.
And as a result, phasers have sort of become box office poison in our industry because people hear it and they go,
Yeah.
right? They don't get it. And we took the LFO from our somersault pedal and me just going like, I like this LFO. I want to see how it does with the phase shifter. We put it to
Mm.
phase sweeping and I was really liking it. I'm like, I like this. I can control this LFO real well. I can do my square wave tricks. I can do my havoc tricks. I get the depth and stuff that I like. I like the speed range of it. I can adjust the speed range to be a little bit different, but I like the ranges that are here. And then I can mess with like the intensity of what feeds the thing and it does the things. But most phasers, the best way to describe it is when I look at a bunch of phasers on the scopes, part of the reason people think of phasing as like an airy thing is because literally it's not like it's going up and down and up and down evenly. There are very few phasers that tend to do that. Ours does that. I think some Mutron stuff does, but most of the time it's just not a common thing.
Hmm.
Most phasers go up and down and up
Oh, okay.
and down, right? And they spend most of the duty cycle in the highs and then visit the lows. And so we've had some people go like, I like this phaser, but it doesn't do the Waylon Jennings thing. And I'm like, you mean the thing where it's just like, like it's high?
Right?
It's
Yeah.
that's the air sound I call it. I call it like it's like foamy air, right?
Hmm.
And it's nice. But I was like, okay, I get it. Ours kind of does that, but it's not quite what you want a phase 90 to do. Okay, that's fine, you know. But I remember we had a visit with music school students and we played a JMP and a 412. Ran and the guy playing was like ran the Arigato through it. And these are kids who've never heard like real amps.
Oh,
Like they're
wow.
music industry studies kids who like they've gotten used to plugins, they've gotten used to making music electronically. They're just not used to hearing real amps and it's not mic thing and all this stuff. And we're trying to make a point like going to a studio and having a guitar player with a real amp and miking it. Doing this is a different experience than plugins, you know. And as soon as he stepped on the Arigato in there are 20 kids in the room, and I heard at least five of them gasp. So I'm like,
That
you
was
know,
me, dude. That
like,
was
yeah,
100% me. I don't
like,
I don't usually like not taken aback that easily by a phaser, first and
yeah,
foremost. I mean, there's certain things I hear, I'm like, oh wow.
yeah,
But like, yeah, that I was like, what? Because that was dude, that was the last one I stepped on too.
yeah, yeah,
So I don't know why I started with the delay and then I went to the Hawaiian and then I went to the wave cannon and then I went to that and I was like,
yeah,
oh, this is my favorite so
yeah,
far. Like
yeah.
it's just, I don't know, man. It's got so much chewy, juicy kind of flavor to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the only way I can't speak in normal terms.
No,
That's
I
the
think
only
you're
way
saying
I
you're
can
make
describe.
what you're saying makes all the sense in the world. Is that we really intended for the duty cycle on like the triangle wave to visit as much time in the lows as it does in the highs, to be like even and down and go. And that's just what I think. That to me is what was pleasing about like the phasers that I liked and the phasing that I wanted to hear from this thing.
Yeah.
And it's especially fun if like you flip it. There's that symmetrical, asymmetrical mode on there. There's like the 4, and then there's the uneven. The uneven is meant to put the capacitance in decades like a vibe pedal. And
Mm-hmm.
so you put that, and then like I did a video where I played Bridge of Sighs, and people were like, I didn't know your phaser sounds like that, you
Right.
know? And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of important to what
Yeah.
we want to do. And I just think those effects, like we got to protect amps, you know? Like if the drummer's allowed to make stage volume, the guitar player should be allowed to make stage volume too.
Yeah.
Like that's just, and amps breathe, they have air to the sound, they have room to the sound, and then it's like, then there are things that happen that will happen with that amp that will not happen if you're just feeding a direct line level to the board. It
Yeah.
just won't, you
No.
know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just yeah, I appreciate, thank you so much for the kind words about that. That was important to me. And it was one of those things like as we were getting the vibrato, as we were getting some of the weird vocal feedbacky things happening with the thing, I sometimes was like, man, we're not going to be able to do that air thing like a Phase 90 does. And I am willing to say, if that's what you want, please do support Jimmy Dunlop and the MXR people. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like George Tripp, Jimmy Dunlop, those people, like they've earned their money. Um, if that's what you want, if then Godspeed, via
Right.
con Dios, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
but with like what I wanted to do is like this is what I think a phaser should do, similar to like what our somersault is like a chorus kind of similar version of that kind of thing. And I'm like, this is what I wanted a chorus vibrato to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I mean, that gets to some of the challenges a designer has with what they choose to make their products do and be able to do, because I think we're making tools. And like I love something like a Lomo, like those weird cameras that take like 9 blurry kind of images, those old Soviet
Oh,
camera kind of
yeah.
things.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
I'm like, you're not going to use a Lomo for your passport photo,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
you know, like,
Yeah. I man.
but you're going to use a Lomo for this kind of thing, or you're going to try that thing, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting about your company too is like I obviously heard them. I heard friends of mine who have stuff who like my contemporary YouTuber friends
Mhm.
and been like very interested because it's like there's so much under the hood, but it's not like option paralysis.
That's
I
a hard one.
cannot stand pedals with way too much shit on them. And like
Hmm.
if there is way too much shit, I don't want to have to read a manual to like be able to use this pedal. Like I want to be able to like get a great slapback sound, get a good like long delayed Gilmore thing, and that's all I need.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? And like I feel like that even the Kilobyte does that really well. If you want it to be simple, cool. If you want
Yeah.
it to get the havoc thing happening, like you can do that. It's right there. You don't have to leave it on.
Yeah.
Like, but
Yeah.
like it's I feel like what you have going on is very different from a lot of companies. And like I think you found a lane that's very very cool.
Thank you.
And like can you answer this in like a minute? Like
Yeah.
where did the Havoc switch? Where did that come from? Like how did you stumble on that?
So there are two things I think influenced that, and I'll be the fast version of it. One was me trying to, when we did our first wave cannon, I was trying to recreate the feedback effect of a Boss super feedbacker
Oh,
pedal,
okay,
and
yeah,
I couldn't do it. And instead, that's what I did. And I was like, well, this is cool. We should embrace it.
yeah,
Right. And the second was I'd known of there had been companies that had done stuff not dissimilar from Havoc, but differently. Like SIB was one in the 90s.
mm,
Um, but theirs was called like a slam button, and normally it was doing just like a different kind of function than what we're doing. But I loved the thought of having some crazy button, you
yeah,
know, like let's
hmm,
just have fun with this, like let's just see, you know.
yeah,
And I just thought that there'd be, kind of a nice twist on these things, to have that option. You have this and then something just something that's an alternate, but not a preset and
Mhm.
not just a different voice, but like, well, what could be something that could be unruly, you know?
Yeah, that's a great adjective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is unruly, but in the best of ways. And like, I haven't had enough time just because of the holidays and everything to
Oh
like
yeah,
sit with them.
yeah,
But like, I like the next week or so, I like really want to like get under the hood with this stuff and figure out how I would use it.
yeah.
Because it's man, I mean, it's a lot of cool stuff, and I'm a
Yeah.
fuzz fanatic, so like, you know, the Hawaiian pizza is another cool flavor of fuzz that I hadn't heard. So
Thanks. Yeah, we
yeah,
called it Hawaiian pizza because we thought people would love it or hate it when we were making it.
yeah.
And
Well,
I
you
was
know, the
like,
first
oh,
time,
that was a working title for it. And then we're like, let's just call it Hawaiian pizza.
yeah, you know, the first time I saw that pedal, was I was in Nashville, and I went by the Novo, factory.
Oh, what a great place. God.
Yeah, and I was hanging out with Matthew, and he took me on a tour, and he took me in his office. This is before he obviously went over to Mythos, but like he had one on his board. He's like, "Have you ever heard this thing?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "You got to hear this thing." So like, they're like, I've been hearing about your stuff for a long time, man, and it's like,
Thank you.
so overdue. But man, all right, I don't want to take up your whole night. Here, let's do this. I do this thing called the lightning round get down.
I love the lightning round get down. Let's do it.
All right, I'm going to ask you 10 questions. We're going to cruise at an altitude of 112 BPM for some suspense. You can explain your answers if you want, Philippe. You don't have to. You can burn right through them if you want. First question is always the same. Lennon or McCartney?
McCartney for longevity and being
Yeah.
here and sticking around.
Right. Cheez-Its or Goldfish?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Goldfish.
Okay.
Goldfish.
Uh,
It hurts to say.
Sometimes you got to go back and forth. You spend a month with one, you go back to the other one the next month.
I go goldfish because I know my kids will eat the goldfish too.
Oh, yeah. You ever had baby goldfish?
No.
The more you know. Check them out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, really, really good. And also, dipping goldfish in wasabi. Sounds gross. Pretty
No,
fucking
this sounds delightful.
It's amazing.
Okay,
all right.
I've got it.
Yeah. Blues Driver or Blues Breaker?
Blues Breaker.
Marvel or DC?
Marvel. I was an X-Men kid. Do not get me started on X-Men 137 and the most important comic book of all time. One of the things that introduced the idea of consequences to comic book readers and death. I think Marvel 137 and like the Gwen Stacy episode, Gwen Stacy Spider-Man. I think those are really important. Do not get me started on retconning or all that stuff.
You got to come back. I'm also a Marvel nerd. You got to come back on it. We'll do it on the whole thing.
Yeah.
All right. Jazzmaster or Jaguar?
Oh, Jaguar.
Okay.
Because I'm 5'10". It looks cooler on me.
Yeah. Board games or video games?
Video games now.
Tesla or Rivian?
Rivian.
Me too, man. Music Man or Fender?
Oh, you bastard. I'm going to say something funny. I'm going to say Music Man. I had the pleasure of playing the St. Vincent this weekend at Oklahoma City for things. And my experiences with those things is like Music Man right now is like, have you ever been to a car rental place and they upgrade you to luxury? That's what Music Man is feeling like right now.
Wow. Okay. That's a testament.
Like when you play like, oh, so this is what a Cadillac North Star feels like. Huh?
Right.
Okay,
Nice.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Here we talked about this earlier. Nirvana or Alice in Chains?
Ooh, oh man, oh. I'm gonna have to say Nirvana, and that hurts me because I had the feeling recently while listening to Rooster by Alice in Chains. I was like, God, I love this. And yet that scene in This Is 40 where Paul Rudd forces his whole family to sit and listen to Rooster.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
And the girls are like so bored, and his wife is there, and he's like, "This is serious music. It's about war." Like these things can both be true at the same time.
Oh, I totally forgot. I can't believe I forgot about that. That's horrible.
Scene, it's like I'm like aware of that scene, and like, but I'm also screaming, "Yeah, they've come to snuff the rooster!" in the car, like I'm screaming it.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I'll go with Nirvana.
All right, cool. And here's the last one, dude. If you could take one record It doesn't have to be your favorite record of all time, but if you could take one record and erase it from your memory, just so you can go back and experience it for the first time again, what record would that be?
Oh, man. First Instinct, Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies live.
Okay.
So
I
like
will take
just
that.
just out there just going like, how does he sound so good? How does he sound so good? Because I also have this other rant. We'll save this for another time about vintage recordings are not as good as you think they were. Like
Mhm.
some stuff like when you hear live footage of a band and you're like, wait, but on record they sound like
Right?
like
Yeah.
like did the
Like
Who sound that good at live at Leeds, or did the Who always sound that good and live at Leeds is the first time it was actually they were actually recorded properly?
that is a great point, my friend. Because that's a pretty killing record.
Yeah,
So
and they sound so like dun 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 dun, like they're like summertime blues, like dun 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 dun, and they sound,
mhm.
yeah, they sound like a thundering herd.
What's your favorite? What do you think is your favorite live record?
Oh, probably still Live After Death because I
Right.
listened to it so much and there's so much funny shit in there, like Bruce Dickinson singing some slow thing at the end of like Revelation. It's like all for, and you hear some buddy in the crowd yell like motherfucker. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, they're
that
in
works.
Long Beach playing for a bunch of metalheads in 1984.
That's
You
so
know,
great. That's awesome,
like,
dude.
uh,
I've never listened to that band. I'll be honest with you. Like, I grew up like listening to heavier music. Like, I got really into Pantera and some
yeah,
other stuff like in middle school. But for some reason, I skipped over. Maybe it's my generational. Like I kind of missed. I was on the end of that
yeah,
hair metal thing.
yeah,
So my brother or my sister might have been more exposed to it than me because I'm the youngest. But like, I never heard that stuff. No one
yeah,
ever played it for me. You
yeah,
know, it's weird.
yeah. I
So,
think for me it was like Headbangers Ball was like the first hour was the seminal thing, and like Headbangers Ball, the first hour were the pop hits, the second hour was like the classics and the tried and true, and then the third hour was the weird shit. And the
mhm.
second hour, all of a sudden, I remember once they played "The Trooper" by Iron Maiden, and I just sat there going oh, I was sold, and
Yeah.
then like it just like it was the right mix of like, because I also think like you watch the video for Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden right in the middle of Satanic Panic and all this stuff, and
So
you watch the
funny.
video for Number of the Beast and you're like, how could anyone have been thinking they were like serious about this shit? They are clearly taking the piss the
Right.
whole fucking time. People are fucking burning these albums and having congressional hearings about this. That in the middle of the Number of the Beast video by Iron Maiden, there is a ballroom dancing competition where the judges all hold up sixes. And people are taking this serious,
Yeah.
like, 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 so I was like,
Hide
they're
your kids.
clear.
Hide your kids.
I just
Like,
can't,
yeah.
I just, it's like, and I'm like, are you? I was at the tailgate for the Iron Maiden show in Charlotte a decade ago, and I just remember laughing my ass off because literally it's a tailgate. People are cooking out food, they're drinking beers, we're throwing a football around. It's a bunch of fucking Gen
Dads.
X and elder millennial dads throwing a football around in the tailgate, eating like it's no different than a Clemson football barbecue, right?
Right?
It's no different than a South Carolina football bar tailgate. There's beers being passed out. It's hot as hell. I was saved by my friend who was like, "Do not." I was like, I was about to buy Newcastle and bring it to the tailgate. And they're like,
Oh gosh.
you do not want some
Can't
heavy
drink that
beers,
all
sir.
day. Yeah.
No, no, no. You know, get some Miller Lite or whatever, right? And I just remember throwing the football around. And I was laughing because one of the two of the people I was throwing the football was like, "Hey, y'all remember growing up and being told that this music was going to wreck your life?" And the guy goes like, "Yeah, I'm principal now at the school where I was told that."
Oh, that's so great.
And it was like,
Oh.
and it was funny as hell seeing like all a bunch of us in our 30s, 40s. These guys clearly like, oh fuck yeah, I'm gonna wear my Iron Maiden shirt, and my ripped jeans, and it's like,
Yeah. That's
yep,
so great,
I'm
dude.
principal.
Moral to the story is never grow up. Like, come
No,
on. Let's just not do that. That's the worst. Yeah.
it's overrated. It's
Oh,
overrated.
oh my God. Well, Philippe, dude, I cannot thank you enough. Like
This has
we're
been a
gonna,
blast. We'll have
we
to
ha-
do this again.
yeah, we have to because we didn't get to any of the shit I wanted to get to.
Too fun. We had
So,
too much fun talking about music. I love talking about music and culture and all this stuff. I love where it was taking us, man.
that's fine. Yeah. BV, thanks for moderating the chat. Everybody, if you're listening on Apple, if you're listening on Spotify, just go to Carolina Guitar Company's website. If you just put that in, you will find them, but it's carolinaguitar.com. They have an Instagram account as well. Just look them up. You will find them. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. And I highly, highly recommend the Arigato. If you're looking for a killer phaser, it will blow your pants off. You'll fall out of your chair like I did when I played
Yeah, I love it. Thank
it.
you.
So anything else to plug real quick before we go? Like anything coming up or?
We're going to do NAM. We
Okay.
just decided we're doing a co-branded thing with the University of South Carolina School of Music Industry Studies,
Oh,
and
cool, man.
yeah, it's just really good kids, really well thought out program. Um, if you have, if you have kids who are looking at colleges who want to who are interested in studying music, but also understanding things that could be professional for them in this, like it covers everything from like running events to running venues to running recording studios. It's going beyond the old school of like, well, we'll just teach them music and hopefully they'll figure it out. It's like, no, you can
Right.
study music, but there's also an industry world of stuff that you could learn about. It's a great program. And then we're doing NAM. We're launching another pedal at NAM, or probably leaking info about another couple. Um, but yeah, it's like I love getting to make this stuff. I have people tell me sometimes like I'd love to get this pedal, just can't right now. I'm like, man, I plan on sticking around. You
Right.
know,
Yeah, I
like
think you shall.
I plan to be here, and and remember, it's just gear. You know, it's just gear.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're making some good ones, so keep doing
Thank
it.
you.
Well, Philippe, thank you so much. Hang out one second. Everybody else, thank you so much for hanging. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time, y'all. Take it easy.